Welcome to Lesson 12, which is medical factors. So the good news for glider pilots is that we don't need to worry about getting a medical certificate where we go get an exam from an airman's medical examiner the way that the powered pilots do need to do. But the fact that we don't need a medical certificate doesn't mean we can ignore medical factors. We have to self-certify before each flight that we are in good condition for that flight. And in order to do that, we need to understand which kind of medical situations are problematic for flying and which ones are not problematic for flying. We also need to think about medical conditions that can develop during a flight that are sort of specific to flying. So the first thing we're going to do in this lesson is go through the I'm safe checklist, which is a mnemonic used to remember things that you should be thinking about when you decide each flight whether you are medically fit for that flight. The I'm safe stands for illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and eating. Next, we're going to talk about some things that can happen during flight that are hazardous, like motion sickness, dehydration, heat stroke, hypoxia, hyperventilation, and inner ear discomfort. Then we'll talk about some of the aeronautical decision-making issues that relate to health information. So one good supplement to the information I'm going to provide here is the basic med course that's offered by AOPA. That is intended for people who are going to fly powered planes under the basic med type of medical certification. But even if you don't need it for that purpose, it is a good course and provides good information. So I recommend people doing that course. So the I in the I'm Safe acronym stands for illness. So any kind of illnesses that would cause you to cancel other types of activities should cause you to cancel a flight. Most people would know about those. But there are other types of illnesses that are just kind of an annoyance for a lot of activities, but they can be a big problem when it comes to flying activities because they are worsened by altitude or turbulence or stress. Things like mild stuffiness or a little bit of a headache are something to worry about for flying, even though you might not cancel a boat trip. Even mild illnesses will reduce your alertness and influence your decision making. And alertness and decision making are critical things when you're acting as pilot in command. So medications can be an impediment to flying. You need to be aware of side effects of any medication that you take, whether it's prescription or over the counter, because the drowsiness is a common side effect. There may be other side effects which are adverse to flying. Now, obviously, the fact that you've taken one of these medications that may have a side effect doesn't mean you can't ever go flying again. So the question arises, after you've stopped taking that medication, how long do you have to wait before it's okay to go flying? And the advice is that you should wait 5 times what the dosing interval was after you stop taking the medication. So if the medication says take one dose every 3 to 4 hours, then you would wait 4 hours times 5, or 20 hours from the time you stop taking that pill or medication, whatever form it is, until it is safe to go flying again. Long-term medications, if they don't have side effects, or you're not experiencing side effects that are adverse, then you can fly. But anytime that you change your long-term medications, either change the dosage or change to a new medication, you need to wait a little while after that change before you go flying so that there's time for potential side effects to show up. Um, the FAA has put out a nice brochure to help you identify which medications are problematic. I can't remember them all. Most people can't. This brochure is a handy thing to have so that anytime you take a medication or consider taking a medication, you can check whether it is an allowed medication for pilots. Stress is the S in I'm safe. And a couple different kinds of stress. External stresses, we're talking about stresses that are not related to flying, but just happen in life, but they can affect your flying. So we're never going to be completely free of all the external stresses, but when we do have things going on in our lives that are causing us a lot of stress, it's good to avoid flying during those times or take along another another rated pilot or an instructor. Another type of stress may be related to the flight itself. Um, when you're learning, a lot of stuff that you do will be stressful the first time you do it. Um, it's impossible to avoid ever having that stress occur while you're flying. You just have to get through it. But be aware of it, and you can mitigate that by making sure that that kind of stress does not get combined with other types of risks that you can control. Make sure you're tackling just that one thing at a time. Alcohol. So, with driving a car, the rule for alcohol is allows you to have a couple drinks and then get in your car. We all know the effects of having more than you should, but the tolerance is different with aviation. Alcohol degrades your reaction times and your decision making, even when you've only had one drink or two drinks, the level where you wouldn't feel like you're really impaired. So the regulations prohibit flying within 8 hours of consuming any alcohol or with a blood alcohol level of 0.04. Um, they also prohibit carrying a passenger who's intoxicated. So it's okay if your passenger has had a one beer. It's not okay to carry a passenger who's visibly intoxicated. And the time to think about whether drinking will influence a planned flight is not when you're ready to take the planned flight. You have to think about it when when you're offered a drink or deciding whether to have a drink. Anytime you're thinking, should I, this is a good time to have a beer, you need to think, am I going to be doing any flying in the next half day? Fatigue. So there's different types of fatigue. There's sort of long-term fatigue and short-term fatigue that you get from just being, if you take a run, you'll be fatigued for a short term, but you get over it quickly. When you go a night or two without good quality sleep, you're going to be fatigued and your performance will suffer. Even if you're not feeling sleepy, you will still be less able to function as a pilot. Fatigue results in mistakes, poor judgment, poor decisions, which are the things that lead to bad results in aviation. Some things that can make you feel less fatigued in the short run, like taking caffeine, um, can leave your performance even more degraded after they've worn off. So the E in I'm safe is for eating. So when you're hungry, not only is it unpleasant to be hungry, but if you're hungry enough, you can be lightheaded, you're easily distracted. A large meal can leave you feeling sleepy. So you want the nice in between. Sometimes it's hard to avoid and get the eating right because you can be unsure exactly when your flight will happen. So you don't know, should I go have lunch or not? It's a good idea to have some snack food around, especially, at the glider field. A lot of times we'll be waiting around for your chance to fly. You thought you were going to fly at 10, and then it's 1 o'clock and you're overdue for lunch, and now it's your turn. So having some snacks available and eating while you're there is a good way to handle that. During training, you're not likely to have very long flights, but once you are a rated pilot, long flights is a thing we strive for, and it's important to have snacks available during the flight. Other people have modified the I'm or use a different version of the I'm safe checklist where it stands for emotion. Um, I like to consider that to be part of the stress element, and eating is the one I use for E. So now we're going to move on to some things that happen to people while flying. One of the most obvious things that can happen is motion sickness. This is much more common for student pilots and for passengers than it is for people who have been pilots for a long time, because you do become acclimated to the motion. However, you're never completely out of the risk of getting motion sickness, even after you've been flying for a long time. The key thing to know, if you start feeling motion sickness while you're doing in your flight training, you need to let your instructor know right away, and you need to let them know as you're starting to feel airsick, because once it starts happening, it can come on pretty quickly. By the same token, once you're a rated pilot and you're carrying passengers, you need to coach them ahead of time to make sure they know that if they are starting to feel airsick, they need to tell you right away, not wait until they're actually feeling quite airsick. And once somebody's starting to feel airsick, it's time to end the flight as soon as you practically can. There are medications available to lessen the effects of air sickness or make it not occur. Those are not a good idea for pilots. Um, the side effects have their own problems. It's better that you just take take it gradual. If this happens to you as a student pilot, it might extend the time that it takes you to get through your flight training, because you'll have to take shorter flights with your instructors, or maybe initially limit your flights to days when it isn't as bumpy. But doing that will help you build up your tolerance to air sickness, and you will get over it, and you'll be fine. Dehydration is another thing that can happen. Um, it's tempting not to drink enough, um, because you're trying to avoid the other problem a long flight is having to end the flight because you have to pee. So There are ways to handle the peeing during flight when you get to the point where you're going to be start taking some real long flights. Talk to somebody, preferably somebody of the same gender, who can uh, talk to you about how ways to deal with that. But don't deal with it by not drinking. And it also happens just because even if we're not taking long flights, sometimes when we're out at the field, if if we don't think about drinking, we don't. Some of the symptoms of dehydration: nausea, headaches, being irrational, muscle cramps, rise in body temperature, dizziness. Usually by the time you're noticing these symptoms, your dehydration has gotten pretty bad. And if you let it get too bad, it can develop into heat stroke. So, hypoxia. Hypoxia is the result of not getting enough oxygen to your organs. Uh, your brain is the most important one. In aviation, hypoxia is the result of flying at high altitudes. Um, Other things, like if you're a smoker, that will make it happen. Make you more susceptible to hypoxia than a non-smoker. The symptoms: increased breathing rate, headache, lightheadedness, dizziness. There's a lot of these symptoms of different conditions. You actually have some of the same symptoms, but um, tingling, warm sensations, sweating, poor coordination. These symptoms tend to kind of sneak up on you. There's a tendency with hypoxia to have this feeling that everything is well, artificial feeling that everything is well, that makes you not notice that things are not well. So the way to avoid hypoxia when you fly at high altitude is to use supplemental oxygen. So there are regulations that determine when we are required to use supplemental oxygen. Specifically, all required crew members, when you're above 12,500 feet for 30 minutes or longer, you have to use supplemental oxygen. Or if you're above 14,000 feet, no matter how long you're up there, you need to use supplemental oxygen. Other than the regulation, the recommendation is to use it more often than the regulations require. It's recommended anytime you're 10,000 feet MSL during daytime, or 6,000 feet MSL at night. The lack of oxygen can affect your night vision more than day vision. So that's part of the reason why at night the recommendation is lower. So a few things that you need to know about aviation oxygen systems. The first one is that you have to use aviation oxygen. You can't use oxygen that's meant for other applications. There are different types of oxygen systems. Some of them provide a continuous flow of oxygens. Others sort of measure how much you need and meter it out. Those are more expensive, but the oxygen will last longer. So there is another acronym, because the FAA loves acronyms, for things you need to pay attention to when you are going to be in a situation where oxygen is required. And it's the price checklist: the pressure, the regulator, the indicator, the connections, and the emergency bailout bottle. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because I personally haven't flown in situations that need oxygen. But if you're going to be in that situation, make sure you get instruction from somebody who does know what they're talking about. Hyperventilation. It's a different condition than hypoxia, but they tend to have very similar symptoms. So hyperventilation happens from increasing your breathing rate, usually due to a stressful situation. But you also tend to increase your breathing rate due to a hypoxia situation. Hyperventilation causes you to decrease the carbon dioxide level in the blood because you're breathing so fast. And that causes its own symptoms. There's a high overlap of symptoms between hypoxia and hyperventilation. The correct response to hyperventilation is to consciously slow your breathing rate. I've also heard people say to put a bag over your mouth so that you're rebreathing the same air. Um, that's probably better when you're trying to control it for somebody else. You can't necessarily consciously control their breathing rate. So when we fly at varying altitude, we encounter significant changes in the air pressure, which, if everything in our bodies is working correctly, the pressure on the inside in our inner ear will also change so that there's no pressure difference across our eardrum. Sometimes things interfere with that, and we get a different pressure on our in our inner ear than what we have outside, and that causes discomfort, and it can be very unpleasant. So there's a couple things that can be done when that is happening, either to you or to a passenger. So when you are climbing and your pressure is not equalizing, yawning is a way that may help to get that equalized. Um, if it isn't, then you should consider not climbing to higher altitude. Usually that's going to be a choice for you to avoid the pressure. When you're descending, um, yawning, swallowing, or there's a trick that you can use where you hold your nose and you hold your mouth closed and hold your nose with your finger and you blow, and that puts pressure on the inside of your inner ear, which can kind of make your ears pop and re-equalize. You can't really avoid descending. Sometimes you do have control over the rate that you're descending. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit for a moment about the physiology of our eyes and how our eyes work, because that affects how we should scan for traffic. So, eyes, the lenses of our eyes will focus the light on the back part of our eye called the fovea, which is where the cone cells and the rod cells are that detect light and send signals to our brain, which we can then interpret as vision. So the cones are the cells that provide us color vision, and they really provide us our detailed vision, but they require quite a lot of light, and they are concentrated near the center in the back of the eye, except for this area where there's a nerve that needs to go into the eye. Around that area, the fact that there's this nerve coming to the back of our eye means there's actually a little blind spot where we're not seeing anything at a given point in time, although our brain kind of fills that in for us so that we don't notice that. But there's actually a spot in our field of view where we're not seeing anything. Rods are what provide us our night vision and our peripheral vision. They require a lot less light, and they are located more around the farther from the center. So they at night we have a much bigger area in the middle of our field of view that we don't have particularly good vision. We actually have better vision in our peripheral vision at night than we do straight ahead. So that blind spots that we get in our view influence the best way to do traffic scan. So the recommendation for how best to scan for traffic is to scan the horizon in 10-degree increments. You spend a second or two at each increment, and then after every few, you take a quick look at the instruments. You should be spending considerably more time with your eyes outside on the horizon than what you're spending with your eyes on the instruments. And when you look outside, it's good to focus on something distant consciously. Otherwise, your eyes, by default, they tend to focus at a distance of like 10 to 20 feet, which obviously that's not, you're not interested in seeing the things that far ahead. You want to see at a much bigger distance. So now let's apply some of this information. I'm going to go through some scenarios here. And when we get together in person, I want to talk about how you would deal with some of these different situations. So first scenario, let's say that you have hay fever and this is the time of year where it's making your nose run. How would that impact your plan to get checked out in a different glider? Another scenario, let's say you've been taking a medication and that medication may cause drowsiness. The directions on for your medication say you take one pill every 3 to 4 hours. You took a dose at 8 o'clock this morning and you want to fly this afternoon. Is that long enough that you don't have to worry about that side effect? Another scenario, let's say you're taking a friend out flying and you want to show them how great soaring is. You found a great thermal, you're climbing in it, you've made 4 or 5 circles, and your passenger says, "Oh, I wish I didn't eat that chili dog today." So what do you do? Another scenario, you had an annual physical yesterday at your doctor. As far as you know, it went really well. Uh, Today, you're waiting in line to get for your chance to go flying, and you get a text message from your doctor. It says, "Call me. We need to talk about your blood test results." How is that text message going to influence your your flight today?